believe it or not, there are times when you should not repurpose and leverage a piece of content, what you can do instead. Hey there, I'm taking a little bit of a departure. So I'm going to be talking about podcasts and repurposing the podcast, whether you're a host or whether you're a guest. But with my clients, I not only repurpose that content, but I repurpose Zoom calls, videos that they have in the past, webinars, summits. There's so much content that you likely have in your arsenal that you can repurpose and leverage to help you get more leads, to help you attract client, and just to have consistent content out there that is showcasing you as the authority and will attract your ideal clients. But sometimes I tell my clients that that is not a useful piece of content to repurpose and leverage. So believe it or not, there are times when you should not repurpose and leverage a piece of content. So this episode is going to share what those scenarios are and what you can do instead. So one of the pieces that you want to look at is the content truly evergreen? You know, some videos that you create or even solo podcast episodes, they're done with a specific focus in mind. They're done for a launch, a webinar, a program that you're pushing, and they may even have dates or references to those call to actions or programs that you reference. In other words, it's just not relevant anymore. Here's what I do with my clients. I suggest that they have an inventory spreadsheet. So whether you've got videos in Vimeo or YouTube or Google Drive, make a list of like your summits, your webinars, your past videos, all that content. And then you're gonna reference the topic, obviously link to it. If it's in YouTube, how many views so that you know what's relevant, what's getting attention, what's not, the title, and then also if you have any reference to any of those events or old programs. That way, when you're going to repurpose a piece of content, you're organized, you know which ones that you can gray out and saying, nope, don't use this anymore. I can use half of this, but not the second half because it references old programs that I used to run, maybe your old branding. So having that inventory will help you keep on track to make sure that your content is always relevant and is always going to help you meet your goals. And then you're going to know what to repurpose and not repurpose. You don't want to be halfway through making video clips and creating a blog post or whatever the content is, and then all of a sudden be like, oh, I totally missed that it mentioned my old program, like throughout the whole thing. It'll just save you a ton of time. The next thing you want to ask yourself is, does it involve a ton of editing? Like, is it worth your time? Back in the day, I feel like people don't really do this as much anymore, is that have like the radio shows, right? And so that's what a lot of people did with their podcasts. It was all on like radio shows. And I had someone come to me once and they're like, oh, I've got so many past episodes, guest interviews on this radio show. I can download them and reuse them. Here was part of the problem. They had a ton of commercials. There was like little blips inside of it that, welcome back to the whatever show and the radio. And then there was like a transition and a break and then welcome back. So throughout it, there were like so many little tiny things that had to be cut out to get to the actual meat of the episode. To process that and edit, especially if it's video and audio, it would have been a hefty cost investment for that. So what I suggested to them was pick some episodes where the guest was a key person in your industry with a big audience that they can really tap into and leverage, and invest in the time to extract and repurpose that content for those episodes. And honestly, especially if there's solo episodes where you're talking on the radio show and so forth, it would honestly just be quicker to re-record some of those new ones. So for those of you that have done the radio shows in the past and you're thinking about reusing that content, definitely take that in mind because it can be a pretty hefty project. Now, I've had this scenario come up as well, where the content is really only meant for clients. And so I've had clients come to me and it's like, oh, I've had these like not one-on-one coaching calls, obviously, but like group calls or Q&A sessions or office hours or whatever it may be. And they're like, oh, there were such good moments in there. There was like some aha moments for people and great teaching moments. And, everyone just loved it. They got so much out of it. That may be true, but it may be really tricky to pull out those little clips. So if you've got like an hour and 15-minute, Zoom recording, there might only be like 10 minutes of a piece of content that would be relevant to someone that was not in that call. So a prospect, because a lot of it too, within those types of calls, it's this conversation that has grown and built on itself. And so when you get to the end and you get to like a clarity moment, quite often you have to understand that context of that conversation that occurred in order for really it to be impactful. So, you can go through them and look at the transcripts and find a couple of good nuggets that can stand alone by itself, but you just really want to take that into consideration. And from a logistical standpoint, a lot of those Zoom type recordings are in gallery mode where you see, the grid of all the faces. If you're using that, creating reels and shorts is going to be next to impossible because it's not in a speaker format. And the other thing is, if you have all those people that are talking, you see them in those calls, then you may need permission to have their, point or their words or their imagery to be used within social media and your content. So just a few caveats to think about. And honestly, to go through a whole like hour-long Zoom to get two little nuggets, that is super time consuming, just so you know, from like a logistical standpoint, from like what we do. But I think it would be more impactful for you to think about that call, maybe get a summary and like the concepts that were in that call, maybe some of the problems and some of the solutions, and do your own video. Mention, hey, I did a great coaching call last week in my whatever program. Again, you're seeing your program. And we talked about this, maybe you have this problem as well. And then some of the solutions or aha moments that came up were this. So not only are you going to make that video really concise, but you're going to relate to the audience in sharing that problem. And then you're going to give some solutions and also seed your programs while you're at it. So that is one way to repurpose those client-facing like coaching calls, group coaching calls, Q&As, whatever you want to call them. It's just another way of repurposing that content so that you can make a usable piece of content that can help you seed your programs and attract your ideal client that's going to fill those programs. So just another thought. Now, this kind of ties in is the content that you're wanting to repurpose and leverage, does it teach or is it a conversation and more of a story? So I've had some videos and they're like, let's say a video or a podcast episode or a solo episode, whatever it may be. And it's more of a conversation between a couple of people, or it's the host or person sharing a story and an outcome. To hear the whole thing is absolutely, it's great. Absolutely put that in YouTube, make that a blog post. It may be tricky to pull out quotes or reels or shorts because there is such a long conversation or a story. So it's hard to get like a little nugget of information out of it. Do you know what I mean? So when you are looking at different recordings, just kind of look at the video or get the transcripts and go through the content. And if it's a conversation with numerous people, sometimes it can be hard to glean that specific video clip or quotes from the recording. Another scenario where that comes up is like panel discussions. So I've had clients that guest on a podcast or host a podcast, and there are panels. So there's 4 or 5 people in the episode talking. From a listener perspective, it might be tricky to listen to because people, they talk over top of each other. It might be disjointed. Conversations just naturally naturally, meander, they go off track. So it may feel like it was a great conversation and useful information, but just kind of review it from that lens of repurposing it and leveraging it. Are you able to pull out little reels and clips that can stand alone by itself and serve someone and help someone? There totally might be great, actionable, small teachable moments within that content, but just to be mindful of how it comes across for other people and the ability of pulling out those little nuggets of information to leverage and reuse. Now, that brings me to another point, and that is looking at your content, your podcast episode, your guesting, your videos, your webinars, and so forth, and really looking at it through the lens of what sound bites can I pull out? Is there enough micro content in that video recording that makes it worthwhile to leverage? For instance, someone gave me like an hour-long recording, and in the end, I could only really pull out 3 little clips that were succinct sound bites that stood by itself and made sense for someone scrolling on YouTube or Instagram and so forth. And so it took a really long time to dig through it and find something that was like a good solid sound bite that stood by itself and that had substance. It wasn't just fluffy. Even when you're recording, honestly, when you're crafting your scripts, crafting your talks, thinking about single concepts and sound bites will really help you leverage and repurpose that content down the road. It's kind of like, I think of it in bullet points. How many bullet points can you extract from that piece of content? So even just thinking about it that way might help you figure out what is easier to repurpose and what's not great to repurpose. And lastly, I want to talk about relevancy. Is your content relevant to your offers that you're doing now? And I'll give you an example. So I have a client, they have a ton of content, right? A ton of live videos that they've done, live Facebooks, videos on YouTube. They've guested on podcasts, a ton of content. And so their mindset was, I don't want to create anything new because I have a whole backlog of all this stuff that can be used and repurposed. Now that is true. There is a huge library, but not all of it is relevant. First, obviously look at the, the video quality and the audio quality, what you did 3 years ago. It just may not be, as great a quality. And sure, maybe you were like the money mindset maven, a few years ago, but you've pivoted your business and now you're focusing on email marketing and you're helping people write content and clean their e-list. And so the videos or the long form content that you would have had in the past, maybe it's about mindset and, will that be useful to attract your ideal client and convert them into your funnel for them to say yes to your offer that relates to email marketing? So you really need to think, sure, it's there, I can use it, but you don't want to create content for the sake of creating content. You want to create content, social media, reels, LinkedIn articles, or whatever it is. You want to create it so that you can nurture, you can attract, and you can convert prospects to get on the phone with you, to sign up for your programs, to become a lead, get on your list, whatever that may be. So really think about the relevancy. So I'm just going to do a quick recap. 1, you want to make sure that the content is evergreen. 2, you want to make sure that it doesn't involve like a ton of editing. 3, looking at the content and knowing whether it's right for your prospects or if it's really only for your clients. Then, does it teach or is it really just a conversation and more like stories? Are you able to pull out those clips? And the last 2 is there enough micro content within that piece to make it worthwhile? And lastly, how relevant is the content to your offers? So yes, I'm all for repurposing podcasts and everything else under the sun, but there is always a caveat. And I hope this episode made you look at your content in a fresh way. And if you want help creating content, I love strategizing, auditing what you have, what you can use, looking at your avatar, your call to actions, your goals, seeing what works and creating a plan so that you do have consistent content that boosts your authority, showcases your expertise, and attracts leads and clients. That's the name of the game, right? So go to smoothbusinessgrowth.com. You can obviously reach me on LinkedIn or lindsay@smoothbusinessgrowth.com. I would love to hear from you. And let's get on a call, and happy to help you out. See you next week on the Leverage Your Podcast Show.